Hey, what's up, everyone? With the release of Spider-Man No Way Home, there are now 9 Spider-Man films, so I think it's a perfect time for me to sit down and rank them and share my thoughts on all 9 Spider-Man films. And real quick, before I jump into this ranking, if you enjoy, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below to tell me your Spider-Man rankings down below in the comment section, and if you disagree or agree with anything on my list, let me know. And remember, this is just my opinion. You'll notice in my list I have a very peculiar taste in Spider-Man films. And Spider-Man is like Star Wars, where everybody's list is different. It's just one of those things, because we all grow up at different times and have different experiences with different Spider-Man films, and I think everybody's list is going to be different. So just keep that in mind. This is purely my opinion. I'm extremely biased in terms of how I view my Spider-Man films, and you're going to notice that through my list. So just keep that in mind. It's just my list. And without further ado, let's jump right into the ranking. And starting things off at number 9 is going to be Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is just probably the least interesting Spider-Man film of the bunch. It's the second one with Andrew Garfield, directed by Mark Webb, starring Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. This one has Electro, and also has the return of Harry Osborn, Harry Osborn's in this one as well. And overall, this movie is just frustrating all around. The plot is just very not interesting. It's like, it quickly... I have the same issue with the first one, but it just gets very like sciencey and very like superhero, and it's not focused on Spider-Man enough. It's certainly, Spider-Man is the core of this movie, but you just don't get enough Peter Parker in this film, enough real Spider-Man development. I think that's how I personally see it. And I've also found the villains in this movie just be extremely weak. I've never been a big fan of Electro. I like his origin before he becomes Electro. But once he becomes Electro, I think he's alright, but his look just looks way too goofy. He's like bright blue. It's just never been something I've been a fan of. Harry's alright, like I said, until he becomes a hero, then his look is just terrible and he just feels shoehorned into the film. There's a lot of, the whole final act is probably the strongest part of the film. The whole final battle with Peter having to save Gwen and all that stuff, that's really great Spider-Man stuff. But after that, with like Rhino and everything, it's just stuff you want to forget. It's just a very frustrating movie. It's not horrible. I don't think there's a bad Spider-Man film that's just, clearly terrible. But this movie is extremely frustrating because it definitely should have been better, and it's always been a frustrating one to watch, and honestly a kind of hard one to get through. So coming in at number 8 is going to be Amazing Spider-Man. This is the one from 2012. I remember back when this came out in 2012, I was so excited because this was the first time I really could be anticipating a Spider-Man film in my life. He was my favorite superhero going into this movie. I saw it at a drive-in theater, and I was just so stoked for this movie because I was in love with Spider-Man. I remember being so disappointed by this film. Really, this movie's been a letdown for me my entire life. The biggest standout, or the biggest positive from this film, is Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. I really do like him. I wish he had better movies around him because I think he's a tremendous Spider-Man. He feels very natural in the role, and he just does such a good job as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man. I've always enjoyed him in these movies, and he's definitely the part of these movies that makes him the most watchable. The issues with this film is it's just not interesting. It doesn't warrant it existing. Obviously this was 5 years removed from Spider-Man 3. And obviously you're completely revamping the franchise, and it just doesn't warrant its existence. It just feels very like cash grab, that Sony just wanted to make another Spider-Man film because people will go watch any Spider-Man film they make. It just doesn't really warrant its existence. A lot of the themes and stuff in this movie are very familiar to the first Spider-Man film. It feels a very weak and uninspired Spider-Man film. I've never been a big fan of Lizard. The whole plot of this movie is once again, it gets very like sciencey. As we go to like this lab, and it's just like cuts away from Spider-Man. It just feels like they weren't good at like blending the two plots together. It's just the tone and pacing are really weird at times. And it's just a very kind of frustrating film, like the second one to get through. It does have its moments. The action in this one and the second one are both really good. And like I said, Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone are both great in these films, and the emotion in both these films do hit. But these two are easily my least favorite of the Spider-Man movies. Coming in at number 7, and probably the biggest surprise for me, because this movie has dropped a lot, because it used to be my favorite MCU movie, and that's going to be Spider-Man Homecoming. I really loved this movie when I saw it back in 2017. I was obsessed with it for a while. I've seen it like probably 4 or 5 times now, and it just gets worse every time I watch it. I still like it. It certainly is still a good movie. It just has a lot more issues that have been highlighted for me as I've rewatched it. The first one being, it's just like, it doesn't resonate with me at all on an emotional level that pretty much all the Spider-Man films before it do. The emotion does not hit in this movie for me at all. I don't buy into this whole childish Spider-Man stuff they go for. with him being in high school and having all these high school problems. I just don't get how that could possibly tell a compelling Spider-Man story. It's just very weak. Also, we just don't get a ton of Spider-Man being Spider-Man in this film. You don't really get, him being a hero and, living up to these expectations. You just don't get a whole lot of that kind of stuff in this film. There's a whole Iron Man plotline, which is all right. It's definitely one of the better arcs of the movie. But even that, it still just feels very weak and very bare bones. This does have a strength. I do like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Michael Keaton as Vulture is really good and one of the standout MCU villains in the franchise. And this movie definitely has its moments. It's funny at times. That's one of the things with the Tom Holland Spider-Mans is there's a lot of comedy that's kind of shoehorned into them, and they are funny. I think the Spider-Man movies in the MCU are some of the funniest. But overall, the story in this one is just too cluttered for me, and it's honestly an exhausting movie to watch for me personally. And it's one that's gone down on my rankings a lot in recent years. So, but I still do enjoy a lot about it. So coming at number 6 is going to be the sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home. This movie has actually gone up on my rankings. I do like it more. Originally, I had Amazing Spider-Man and Homecoming above this one, but this one has gone above those now. It still has a lot of the issues that Homecoming has for me. The storyline is way too cluttered. You just don't get a lot of Spider-Man being Spider-Man. It feels like something's always happening and there's always plot lines going on for Spider-Man. You just don't get to settle down and develop his character a lot because it's just too chaotic of a plot line as they're really trying to force. You're trying to tell a Spider-Man story while still being in the MCU and doing the usual MCU gig. It didn't really work in this film. I don't think it worked in the first one either. While Mysterio is a good villain, I think he still feels very underwhelming and not as good as he should be. I do like Jake Gyllenhaal in this movie. He's really good as Mysterio. He's always been a little underwhelming. He's certainly a good villain, though. This movie does have a lot of awesome Spider-Man action moments. The final act is really cool with all the green screen stuff or whatever it is, the drones and all that. It's a pretty cool scene. Overall, like I said, it's just too cluttered of a film. It doesn't settle down and tell an interesting story. It's just constantly moving, trying to keep the audience entertained. And that's just not how I like Spider-Man films at all. I like them to be more settled down, more development on the hero and what it means to be that. So this movie has always been frustrating for me. It's still a good movie, like I said, not terrible by any means, but just definitely a little frustrating for me, but nonetheless, it comes in here at number 6. So coming at number 5 for me is going to be Spider-Man 3, definitely the most controversial Spider-Man film. This was really the Spider-Man film that made me fall in love with Spider-Man. I remember seeing it back in theaters in 2007. I think it was the first Spider-Man film I ever saw, and I just loved it when I first watched it. Obviously, as I've gotten older, I don't like it quite as much as I did when I was a kid. But this movie means a lot to me in terms of my love for Spider-Man. And this movie at its best is just Sam Raimi making a Spider-Man movie, and with all the awesome Sam Raimi Spider-Man stuff we get in this film, whether it be the awesome moments like Sandman in this film, the amazing score, Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, there's a lot of cool scenes between Peter and Eddie. There's a cool scene with them in the Daily Bugle. That's a really cool, intense scene. I do like the final act. I think it's a really cool scene, even if Venom's not great. I do like the whole final battle. I think it's very entertaining, and it's just awesome scene to watch and crafted very nicely by Sam Raimi. The second act in this movie is where the issues kind of start. The whole movie just starts dragging about an hour in to this movie, and the storyline just slows down, and they just start shoehorning in all these elements to set up the final battle, or what will become the final battle with Venom, Harry, and Sandman. And that's obviously an issue. It's very boring to get through. It's very hard. Obviously, you have the weird, bad, dark Tobey Maguire stuff in this movie that a lot of people don't like. And while it is an issue for me as well, I don't hate it as much as probably a lot of people do. It is definitely goofy and definitely feels unnecessary in the film, and Venom is definitely the weakest part of this film because he just feels very shoehorned in here, and he just gets little to no development as Venom, and even Eddie Brock doesn't get a ton of development either. It's still frustrating, but I do love this film. This film means a ton to me, and these 5 and up, I do like all 5 of these movies. I would give them 4 stars or higher out of 5. I do enjoy all these films a lot. So anyway, Spider-Man 3 comes in here at number 5. So coming at number 4 for me is going to be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I was very late to this movie. It's the only Spider-Man film I haven't seen in theaters since Spider-Man 3, which is frustrating, but because it is an amazing film. It's just so creative and so bright and so unique within the Spider-Man catalog of films. It's just so, like, stands out so much, and it's so fresh with what they did with Spider-Man, bringing in Miles Morales, who's just incredible as Spider-Man. It just tells a different story with all sorts of different ideas and themes, and it just works so well on what they did here. It was really ingenious how they came up with this story. The story itself here is very compelling and emotional and just works so well. Miles Morales, like I said, is great as Spider-Man. I love that they brought in all these other different Spider-Mans from different Spider-Man universes that just make this film a lot of fun and really keep it fresh throughout. It's just so entertaining to watch. It's definitely one of the easiest Spider-Man films to get through because it's just so full of heart and, you know, it's so creative with what they do with the animation, and it's just such a entertaining film to watch that's just crafted so well, that has so much care put into it. It's definitely the most unique Spider-Man film we've gotten, and it's and one of the just most entertaining Spider-Man films we've gotten. It's just, you know, such a well-made movie. And so Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse comes in here at number 4. So coming at number 3 is going to be the new one, Spider-Man No Way Home. I just found this movie immensely satisfying with everything they set up and everything, all the build-up for this film. Obviously, it was one of the most hyped films of the year, and it just delivered on everything I wanted it to in terms of the nostalgia, bringing back old characters that we love, and getting to see them again. Green Goblin, getting to see him again and really developing his character throughout the film and making him an even better villain. Stuff like that just made me love this film, and how they're honest with the old characters, making them feel like their old selves, and the nostalgia in this film just works so well and just puts a smile on your face the whole time. But at the same time, this could have easily just been a nostalgia cash grab, but they actually told an interesting story with Tom Holland's Spider-Man that really develops his character in a very mature and satisfying way, something that's very unusual in the MCU, and it just works so well in this film, and it really just made this film work really on all regards, bringing back all the old characters to make it very fun, very interesting, and very satisfying for the fans, and really as a love letter to Spider-Man film fans, but still telling an interesting story. It just works so well for me. So it comes in here at number 3. I could see it going down in the future as some of the issues in it are highlighted more and more, but right now I just really enjoyed this film when I saw it in theaters, so it comes in here at number 3. So coming in at number 2 is going to be Spider-Man from 2002, the one that started it all. These top 2 are easily my top 2 by far. They're the 2 5-star Spider-Man films in my opinion, and I don't really see any Spider-Man film ever competing with these top 2 because I just love these movies so much and they mean so much to me. And this one is just a perfect origin story. It's really half the movie you're just building up Peter Parker as Spider-Man and telling, you know, the beginning of his story. And it just works so well. It's very heavy with its emotion, with all the Uncle Ben stuff. It's just very, like, satisfying emotionally to watch. It's very, you know, heavy, like I said, with the emotion, but it also has a lot of emotional highs in this film, watching, you know, him become Spider-Man and, you know, realizing the responsibilities of that. Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin is just incredible. Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man is one of my favorite characters in movie history. He's just such a likable protagonist in this film. And Sam Raimi develops his hero, Spider-Man, so much to the point where you really care about him and you really want to root for him. And that's just something we don't get a lot in superhero films nowadays, in my opinion. Just really truly caring about a superhero and really rooting for him, and really, you know, sympathizing with what he's going through. It's done so well in this film, like showing the responsibilities of a hero and what it means to be a hero, and it's done so well. It's really just an amazing experience every time I watch this film. I could watch it every month. It's just such a rewatchable film that I love. I know certain elements haven't aged well or amazingly well, but in my opinion, it's a perfect film. All right, and coming at number 1 for me is going to be Spider-Man 2. I go back and forth between Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 in terms of what one's my favorite. I think they're both perfect movies, and I just love both these movies to death. They're just both done amazingly well, and this one is just a perfect comic book movie and a perfect sequel in terms of how it further develops Spider-Man and kind of adding the stakes to the film and making things more intense and more harder on Peter Parker, and adding, you know, a new villain in Doc Ock, who's just incredible, played by Alfred Molina. He's just such a good villain. Probably my second favorite superhero villain of all time. He's just so good in this film, and his motives and how he wants to do good, but, like, you know, obviously he's been messed up. It's just so good, and that all works so well building up to the final act. Like the first one, it's a very emotionally heavy film. There's a lot of high-low emotions in this film. And this movie is just filled with moments. I think there's just so many great comic book film moments in this movie that you can only get in comic book films, like the Aunt May monologue about being a hero. The whole final act between Doc Ock and Spider-Man is just amazing. And then the train scene where Spider-Man has to stop the train is just one of, in my opinion, probably the best scene in any comic book film ever. It's just done so well, and how they show, what Spider-Man means to be, what it means to be Spider-Man, and what Spider-Man means to the people of New York City. That's just such emotional stuff that you really don't get in comic book movies nowadays. It works so well. It was so emotional to watch that, and this whole movie just shows the importance of being Spider-Man. And it just tells such an interesting Spider-Man story. I personally do like the whole him losing his powers thing. I think it adds a lot to the film, and it really develops his character in a way, and realizing who he has to be. Spider-Man realizing who he has to be, and the importance. And this movie is just, I think it's a perfect comic book film. I don't think they come any better than this. It's probably my second favorite behind The Dark Knight. It really defines my entire love for the character of Spider-Man and how they tell Spider-Man stories. It works pretty much in every regard, I would say. From the score, the cast, the actors in it, the story is just amazing. Everything in this movie just works for me. So Spider-Man 2 easily comes in at number 1, or, like I said, pretty close between the top 2, but those two are like a league above number 3. So anyways, that's going to do it for my ranking of all 9 Spider-Man films. As always, if you enjoy, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what you thought about my list, and be sure to share your list down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.